So he asked himself another question that many of us ask ourselves is, who or what am I? Many people have asked that question. Gotten a lot of different answers. But one of the things I'll point out to you, the Buddha's approach in all these things is to make the fewest possible assumptions. To always begin the pursuit of the answer to any question by trying to recognize what the assumptions are that you start with and discard them. And just he's described as the ultimate pragmatist, And so, okay, I'll start with what I'm experiencing right now. And when you do that, if you approach this question in that way, you're going to say, well, I am conscious. It's very similar to what Rene Descartes did, but Rene Descartes was not able to quite as thoroughly let go of his assumptions. And so he said, I think, therefore I am. And the Buddha would say, well, wait a minute. What you're telling me is that you're conscious of having a thought. So don't get carried away and say, I think, therefore I am. You're conscious of having a thought. Because you see, that mistake, that was what threw poor Rene off, is he thought, well, I am real. Of course, he was predisposed to think that way because he was a Christian and believing in a soul, an eternal soul, is an important part of that. So we can excuse him. But the Buddha had no such limitations. So, okay, I am conscious. Wow, okay. Of that, I can be certain. Now, what I have to do is say, I'm not getting into what consciousness is, but subjectively, I'm conscious. As soon as I start getting into what consciousness is, well, it's going to get messy. We'll keep it simple. I'm conscious. Okay. And in terms of what I am conscious of this moment, and it seems to me that I've been conscious a lot in the past. So not only am I conscious, but I seem to be an ongoing pattern of repeated episodes of being conscious. Does that meet with your experience? Fit with your experience? Yeah, right. It does. Now, in every instance of being conscious, I'm conscious of something. And when I think about it, do I come up with times that, well, I was conscious, but I wasn't conscious of anything? Well, not really. If I did, then maybe I could pursue the question of what is consciousness. But since I don't, I better pursue the question of what am I conscious of, since I'm always conscious of something, which is that's the direction the Buddha took. Okay. So my whole life has been a series of events in which conscious of this, conscious of that, conscious of the other thing. But what are these things that I'm conscious of? These objects of consciousness. Well, I'm conscious of seeing and visible objects. I'm conscious of hearing and sounds. I'm conscious of feeling and whatever it is I feel with my hands, sensations in my body, so on and so forth. I'm conscious of tasting and tasteable things, conscious of smelling and odors, corresponding to the classic five senses. And then, of course, there's all those unconscious of, this was where Rene got ahead of himself. I'm conscious of thinking, conscious of thoughts, of ideas, of thinking. I'm conscious of memories. I'm conscious of mental images, of imagination. I'm conscious of my mind can generate fantasies, and then I can fantasize about things. I'm conscious of worrying, oh, what if so-and-so happens? I'm conscious of all kinds of mental objects, emotions. I'm conscious of being angry, conscious of being afraid, conscious of being lonely, conscious of being tired, all kinds of things. So those all fall into 6 fairly neat categories. 5 of them are the senses. One of them is all these things that are generated by the mind and known directly to the mind. Everybody agree with me so far? And of course, 5 of those 6, I can just lump them together. They have to do with materiality, physical things. So I can say, all right, I'm conscious of mind and matter. In terms of what I am, okay, I am consciousness of mind and consciousness of matter. I usually think of my body as part of myself, and my body is a material thing. So, okay, I'm conscious of mind and body. So I am mind and body, whatever they are. But now I have a handle on it. Since I know that I'm only conscious of these 6 different kinds of things, I can examine these 6 different kinds of things and see if I can get a little better grasp of what mind and body are. Make sense? Mm-hmm. When I examine what I actually know about material objects of any kind, the world of form in general, including my own body, I find only sensations. Anybody want to dispute that? That's all you find.
Those thoughts are sensations then too.
Thoughts are a kind of sensation. Right now we're just looking at the material,
Okay.
not the mental objects. But we'll put all those mental objects in one group and say we know them directly in the mind, so we'll hypothesize something called the mind sense. So those are sensations too. Here we're talking about physical sensations. So now, interesting thing, I know these material objects by means of my sense organs, which are part of my body, which is a material object. So when I said I am my mind and I am my body, now my body belongs to this category of material objects that I only experience as sensations. So let me correct my thinking here a little bit. I am not mind and body. I'm not consciousness of mind and consciousness of body. I'm consciousness of mind and I am consciousness of sensations. So I think I have a hand because I feel things coming from what I call my hand. I have sensations that I label as hand sensations, and I can direct my eyes towards my hand, and I can see my hand, and I can smack my hand against my hypothetical knee and hear a sound, so I can hear my hand. And I'm just sound of one hand clapping, right? So my hand and really the rest of my body, I've never known my hand. All I've known is the various sensations that lead me to believe I have a hand and that it looks and feels and everything else the way that it does. So now I can say that not only am I this aggregate of conscious experiences, I'm also an aggregate of sensations. They're a subset of those conscious experiences. Subset of them is this aggregate of sensations. And that's really interesting because it means that the entire material world that I thought I knew so well, I realize now all I know are the sensations. And so my mind makes a story up about these sensations that says, okay, I'm walking out into the street and I'm opening my car door and getting into this thing called a car and I'm driving to the store. But that's all a story my mind makes up because of a bunch of sensations around. And of course we could have a reference to the movie The Matrix and say, okay, computer, jam a thing into the back of my head and the computer says, feel this, feel that, feel the other thing. And what's his name? Neo experiences himself walking out into the street, taking his car keys out of his pocket, opening the door, firing it up, driving down the street. But it's just because Neo had those sensations, and his mind obligingly made up the story to match the sensations. So I realized my whole life has been like that. That's what makes the Matrix good, is because it helps people to realize that, yes, indeed, you could be a brain in a jar with some mad scientist just feeding the stimuli in, and you would think you're walking on bars, flying through the air. Now I know I've been doing that all day. So I am an aggregate of conscious experiences, and a subset of those is sensations. And all the material objects, including my body, that I thought were out there, are actually a kind of mental object my mind has concocted to account for the sensations. So that particular mental object, the one I call body or car or all these other things, what those are perceptions. And each of those perceptions is something created by my mind. Yes?
I was thinking about what you were saying last night and relating it to the words you're saying now, and that knowing that it is a perception, and we're talking about pain, and that there will be pain, that the suffering is optional. So when I have these sensations and I'm getting older and I get a disease or I'm in horrible, horrible pain, that if I were really developed, I would be able to know that and watch that, and my body could die, but I would, I would not, I would not suffer, but okay, what's there? I mean, I'm trying to, I'm not being clear, so, quite like the difference between that perception and when things start really physical with your suffering or your pain, and taken to the ultimate, because I believe you said there's always the veil, even if you're very enlightened, that you have the body, and the body will get old and die and suffer, have pain and illness. I'm trying to get that connection that where how does that fit? Where, not fit, but where, if that's so, I would say, do you know you die? That's what I'm asking.
Do you know you lie?
If you are,
Die.
do you know you die? I guess that's really what I'm asking. If you were that enlightened that you absolutely can identify this,
Mm-hmm.
that
I think
kind of turning up the steam on sensation, the more suffering, the more pain you would have, or perception of all these sensations.
I didn't get the last part there.
Well, I'm just trying to equate the words of this, which and applying it to, but I meant, we are in these human bodies that have no self, and yet I'm going to have these.
I think you're trying to jump ahead to the end. Until we get through, until we go through all these other things, it will make more and more sense as we go along. You're worried. You're asking questions based on only partial information at this point. So please, let's come back to that. But let's go through all the information first. Yes.
I'm just sort of trying to figure out this first one. It seems like it's saying that, like, no things actually exist. Is that what it's saying? Or
is it saying what?
No material things actually exist out there?
Okay. Now this is something that I want to clarify. What it is saying is that all I can know are sensations.
Okay.
And my mind says, oh, well, those sensations are due to a cup. It makes, you see, I don't have any experience of this cup that I imagine that I'm holding in my imaginary hand. All I have is is shapes and colors
Okay.
that my eye perceives, and sensations of warmth and pressure and stuff in my hands. The cup, whether a cup exists or not, I cannot discern directly. Okay, at this point, there's a possibility that there really is a cup there, and there really are hands there, and the cup is producing the sensations in my hand, and that my mind is accurately making up a story about a cup, and there actually is a cup that corresponds to the story. But I don't know that. My brain could be floating around in a jar, or I could be in the Matrix like Neo, and something else could be producing those sensations. I cannot know where those sensations come from. Now, I'll tell you where I'm glad you brought that up.
But what it's not saying is that nothing exists.
It's not saying that nothing exists.
All right.
And this was a mistake that was made in the past by people who were studying the Buddha's teaching. And they said, well, gee, these sensations, when I dream, I dream that I'm seeing things and feeling things. So maybe these sensations are not coming from somewhere else. Maybe these sensations are coming from my own mind. And so they jumped to the conclusion that nothing exists, or what they said is there's no reason to assume anything exists outside the mind. So they said nothing exists outside the mind. They liked that idea. They were fond of this thought that they had. Said, my gosh, I think this is true. Nothing exists outside the mind. It's all a figment of my imagination. And they were called the mind-only school. They believed this all it was mind. And therefore, all these sensations are coming directly from my mind. So if I could learn to control my mind, I could turn this cup into anything I wanted. Right? I could live in any world I wanted, just like in my dreams. But what they were doing is they didn't understand these other things that we've already talked about. And these sensations don't come from your mind. They come from outside your mind. And the reason we know that is in the dream, sensations that arise and pass away don't obey any consistent set of laws, of causal laws. And that's exactly how you know you're dreaming. When in your dream, you jump out of a third-story window and flap your arms and fly, that doesn't correspond to the laws of causality. But when you're awake and jump out of a third-story window and flap your arms, you smack on the ground. And that happens every time, over and over again. And that event is consistent with everything that you've ever done. Every time you've dropped your teacup, every time you've seen anything else fall. So the difference between dreams and sensations is that the sensations arise and pass away in strict accordance with laws of causality that you have discerned and are quite aware of. And so we can totally disregard the notion that your sensations come from your mind. Your perceptions are mental creations. They're the story, but the sensations that they're based on do not come from your mind. I mean, they could come from another mind. They could come from a computer. They could come from a Vulcan mind meld. They could come from somewhere else that is mind. And you perceive it as matter because mind versus matter is one of the stories that your mind tells you to distinguish thoughts from sensations. But the thing that you know with absolute certainty, sensations do not come from your mind. They come from outside your mind. There is another reality beyond your personal mind. That's important to grasp. So to say that material objects don't exist, well, the chances of them existing the way that I think they do are pretty slim. And as a matter of fact, if I pay attention to other people, and Chris says, that's such a beautiful cup, I love that color of yellow, and I think, it reminds me of baby puke. just told you that we all perceive things differently. As a matter of fact, we come with a lot better examples than that. We all perceive things quite differently because our perceptions are a creation of our mind, but the sensations that they're based on have a consistency. If you touch a hot stove and I touch a hot stove, we'll both feel the same sensations. So material objects do not exist the way we see them. But to say that the sensations that we base our stories on don't exist independently of the mind is just plain foolishness. Yes.
So just to review, form is the raw sensation, and perception is the combination of sensations that your mind creates meaning out of.
Exactly. Yeah.
Creates the what. So, for example, form would be yellow, hard, this size, and whatever. That would be form, and perception would be cut. Something like that.
Yes. Yes.
And
Right.
both are mediated by the mind,
Yeah.
but they're not
That's
both
right.
from the mind.
Yes. We'll say just a little bit about the sensations. Properly speaking, we should call them sense percepts, because the yellow of the color that you see is actually created by your mind. What causes your mind to create the sensation, the sense percept of yellow, that's something from outside of your mind. You see, because, well, if I could go inside your mind and see this cup from your point of view, I might say, oh, that's the color I've always called red. So I don't know that your mind produces the same sense percept, but what I do know is that whatever produces the sense percept of yellow in my mind is the same thing that produces the sense percept of yellow in your mind. But yes, absolutely everything else you said, yes. Your mind puts together all these sensations and that perception you have. All these things are perceptions. They're all mental constructs, mental formations.
So there's actually, I don't want to call it the real positive sense perceptions, such as whatever those combination of colors that cause the rods and cones in our eyes to see color. And then there's how each of us perceives them.
Yeah, that's right.
So in other words, there's senses, but then there's how you perceive those senses
That's right.
individually, and then there's the aggregate of perceptions, which is another thing.
Well, okay. What I would put in here is this. First of all, there is something that is the source of those sensations and those sense percepts. Let's call that ultimate reality. You can't know ultimate reality, but you have the sensations, and your mind will make a sense percept, So sense percepts are really, they're a kind of perception too. They're a very simple perception. And then your mind will put together shape and color and tactile sensations and stuff like that and come up with a more elaborate perception that we call perception of a cup. So it's perception of yellow and perception of cup. And those are all formed by your mind. In the rupa category of the sensations, we might as well put the sense percepts in that category because if we don't, we get too intellectual and we might confuse ourselves, and we don't want to do that. But then when we do get more intellectual and say yes, but, then we have to say, okay, granted, yellow is also a perception. Okay? So, we're creating these categories for the sake of their usefulness.
But when we say form, are we talking about ultimate reality, or are we talking about our perception?
No, we are not talking, when we talk about, remember form, the aggregate of form is part of me, who I am, the personal self, an individual. Okay? And form is my experience of the sensation. So form is my sense percepts. Ultimate reality is that unknowable thing that I am a part of, but that that is the source of my sense percepts.
Well, that's.
Yeah.
I hope I can phrase what I'm thinking. Our perception of the cup is actually our history, because we've been taught
Yeah.
that this is a cup, we've been taught this is yellow, and this holds stuff. But if you
Yeah.
came from another planet and you didn't have that history, you wouldn't have that perception, would you?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. That's absolutely true. This is only a cup because of all the other cups you've met in your life. The next thing that if I pursue this examination, I'm an aggregate of conscious experiences. Some of those conscious experiences are sensations. Others of those conscious experiences are perceptions, the story my mind puts together to explain those sensations. And I noticed that they're accompanied by feelings of pleasant, unpleasant, or neither. So some of my sensations are pleasant, and some are unpleasant, and some are neither. Some of my perception, the things that I perceive, are pleasant. They arouse in me the feeling of pleasantness. Others of my perceptions arouse in me the feeling of unpleasantness, undesirability. And then there's still others that I'm kind of neutral on. They don't make me feel much one way or the other. So I need to include the experience of these feelings as part of who or what I am. So we call that the aggregate of feelings. Yeah.
So I was curious about if I guess what this is called hedonic tone, right? Or feeling tone.
Yeah.
If it's at what level it emerges. Like it doesn't seem to me like maybe blips of color would have pleasantness, unpleasantness, or neutrality. Or a blip of sound would have that. Does it arise at the level of perception or?
See, if you explore this in meditation, what you will find, or if you explore it in mindfulness in your daily life, but do it originally in meditation and it comes clear very quickly. A sensation arises and each sensation has associated with it the same hedonic quality of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then when your mind elaborates it into a perception, there's a second hedonic experience of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral associated with the perception. The two are different, and they can be opposite. The feelings that are being produced can be pleasant, but the perception that results can be of something unpleasant, or vice versa. The feelings can be unpleasant, but the perception can be pleasant or neutral. Any combination of those, because the feelings elicited by sensations are separate from the feelings elicited by our perceptions. Okay? And the feelings are produced by your mind. The feelings associated with sensations are pretty much hardwired in. Okay? Stick a thorn in your hand, and it's going to be unpleasant, right? Whereas a gentle touch is going to be pleasant. That's more or less hardwired in. But your perceptions are totally created, the feelings associated with your perceptions are created by your mind and can change. What you perceive as pleasant on one occasion, you could perceive as unpleasant on another occasion. Okay? So that's an important thing to know about.
Sensations are hardwired? Really?
What's that?
That sensations are pretty much hardwired?
They're more or less hardwired. Not totally, because nobody's born hardwired with the perception that that purple is a wretched color. On the other hand, most people would probably find the combination of purple and yellow not quite as appealing. Right? But both of those are variable. Some people will love purple and other people won't really like purple. And you can come to love purple and yellow, especially if you watch cartoon shows where the guys in the cartoons are purple with yellow spots. or you could come to test it. So I think the pretty much is an important thing. We're born with a predisposition. I mean, there's even some people, it's hard for me to imagine because I don't experience this way, but there's some people who um, uh, find what most people would consider a painful experience to certain kinds of pain to be pleasant.
Wouldn't that be the perception?
I think that might be the perception, but I don't know since I can't get in the mind of these people. Wouldn't that be perception? I think, you know, definitely in the case where something unpleasant, a sensation that is inherently unpleasant, if you associate it with some pleasant thing, then you would have a perception due to that anticipation. That would be an elaboration in your mind.
Wouldn't that maybe be pain? Like unpleasantness already putting some kind of good, in my perception, some kind of good, bad label on it.
Yeah.
Unpleasant versus pleasant. So then let's say a thorn in your hand causes some kind of pain.
Yeah.
And then whether or not you suffer from it is the perception.
Well, whether or not you
pleasure from it.
suffering is definitely a perception. If your mind generates unpleasantness in response to it, yes, absolutely, you're absolutely right there. And that's one of the things that we set out to change is we want our minds no longer, even though the thorn produces an unpleasant sensation, what we want to do is get to the place where we don't need to have a strong mental reaction of unpleasantness in response to that. Yeah, exactly. Okay, I see where you're going. I agree totally. The last of these is just, it's a summing up of what's left over. Okay, so I've reflected I'm this collection of conscious experiences, some are sensations, some are mental objects. So other mental objects, feelings and perceptions are mental objects, right? In addition to that, there's thoughts and memories and emotions. There's all kinds of other mental objects. So we'll put this, and they're created by the mind. They're mental constructs, or mental formations. So they belong in this last kind of grab bag category. All these different mental objects. But when I think about it, there's something else, other kinds of mental formations that don't necessarily become the objects of consciousness, but they're definitely there. I know by inference they're there, by observing myself, even if I don't experience them directly. They operate in background. They manifest externally as loves and hates, desires and aversions, worries, hopes, fears, and especially as the intentions that drive my behavior. Some intentions I'm conscious of, other intentions I'm not conscious of. But I know, whether I'm conscious of them or not, I know that there is some kind of mental activity, a mental construct that I call an intention that is driving my behavior. An intention is an impulse towards a particular activity to achieve a particular end. And so whether I am conscious of them or not just everything I think, and not just everything that I say and do, but also everything that I think, and even the emotions that I feel are being driven by intentions that I may not be conscious of. Your thoughts and your emotions have that kind of purpose. They're movements of the mind. They're a kind of activity that is directed towards a particular goal. So all of these other things the Buddha lumped together as mental formations. Perceptions are also mental formations, feelings are mental formations, and he separated those out from the rest of these because when you do this kind of self-analysis, they do stand out. But this recognizes the presence of all the rest of them. So a very important part of who I am is this other great collection of mental formations. So what I want to ask you here is, if you followed this, is there anything about you as an individual person that's not accounted for here?
What about the subconscious?
Well, what we're really saying here is these other mental formations operating in the background. When they are in the background, that's when you're not conscious of them. That's what I meant by background. So these mental formations, some of them are unconscious and some of them are conscious. Yes.
What about the social self, the way that everyone else sees you, your roles and relations?
Well, what I would say to that is the way somebody else sees you is their perception of you. It's a perception that exists in their mind. It's not really a part of you, but it can be a part of your ego construct. You can want people to see you in a particular way. You can deliberately try to manipulate other people's perceptions so that they'll see you in a particular way. And so you can have the experience of, well, everybody thinks I'm this, but in my heart, I really don't. Right? So what you are is what you know yourself, not what you've made somebody else appear. Made yourself appear to be somebody else. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
Because other people's perceptions of you, in many cases, you don't know them at all. You often misunderstand them. Ever met somebody who goes to a lot of trouble to appear to be one thing, and everybody just thinks they're pretentious?
Yeah. It just seems like your outward behaviors and everything should matter in who you are. It seems that separating yourself from the rest of reality.
Well, the idea here is that your outward behavior is a result of this last category, mental formations. And your outward behavior is an expression of your perceptions and your desires and your aversions, what you hope to achieve.
I guess it just kind of blurs for me.
It blurs for you? Well, there is a sense in which we are not really separate. You are who you think you are, and I am who I think I am. But you are also what I think you are, and you are also what everybody else thinks you are. But we're not talking about that aspect. Here we're talking about the person that you perceive yourself to be. Okay? We are all interconnected. And I think we all have had the experience of times that we think we're one thing and we discover that everybody else thinks we're something different. And once we know that, sometimes we have to agree, yeah, I wasn't what I thought I was. Something different.
Your question was about like anything about you at all that isn't covered here?
In these 5 aggregates.
What about the physical?
The physical is covered by the aggregate of form.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Yeah, that is your body.
okay.
Your body is really just the sensations and the story it makes about it.
So is this sort of, are these 5 aggregates sort of a remedial phase where you actually understand that you're not separate from everything else, that you tend to perceive yourself in these forms?
Well, these are, I'd rather put it that these are what you really are.
Pardon?
This is what an individual person really is. We imagine ourselves to be something other than this, but this is what we really are if we examine it closely. The nature of an individual person is these 5 aggregates. And I just organize them here. There's form, that's the sensations coming in. Consciousness, that's sort of sits on top of everything that you're conscious of. Oops. You're conscious of sensations, you're conscious of perceptions, you're conscious of feelings, you're conscious of thoughts and memories and emotions and so forth. So taken together as a whole, these 5 aggregates fully account for me as an individual person, mind and body, a psychophysical entity active in the world. So it includes all of my activities in the world. Okay? Within them, I can find nothing that I can claim as I, me, or mine. I have no power over these 5 aggregates that I am. In all of this, there is nothing to cling to as self. In other words, this is the nature of me as an individual person. I am these 5 aggregates. Now, but I am unique. I am unique from, uniquely different than every other collection of aggregates. These 5 aggregates do exist, but they're just that. They're a collection. So I'm unique and I'm special, but there's no self in this. It's just a heap of consequences of causes and conditions. All of these things in these 5 heaps, they're just effects produced by the coming together of causes and conditions, which we've already seen are all part of a much greater whole. Okay.
I stumbled over the last part of the last paragraph on page 7, which says, taken together as a whole, these 5 aggregates fully account for me. On page 7, they are impermanent and cannot be clung to, owned, or in any sense controlled. I stumbled over that controlled part. Maybe I'm laboring under an illusion that part of my job is to become more and more consciously responsible for the state of my consciousness.
And that is your job. I didn't say that you can't influence, or you can influence the direction of the evolution of this is all process, right?
Okay, yeah.
And the process can direct its own evolution.
Okay, so there's not a contradiction.
There's not a contradiction
Okay.
here. What I'm saying is that you can't control any of these aggregates. They are what they are. They are what they are because of causes and conditions. Many of those causes and conditions are internal. And this is where karma comes in. Right now you are these 5 aggregates. You don't have control over that because it's determined by the past. Who you will be tomorrow, you can influence today. Okay? Because you are creating yourself. You are a self-creating process, and you're creating your future self. And it's an interesting thing. You have far more influence over the kind of person you will be in 10 years than you do over the kind of person that you will be tomorrow. And you have almost no influence at all over the kind of person you're going to be a moment from now. Because you make little tiny changes moment by moment. When you understand the direction you want to go, when you understand the kind of person you want to be, then you make little tiny changes moment by moment. And each of these little changes you make expands and it flowers. So the changes you make now in this moment, they'll be a little bud tomorrow. And 10 years from now, they'll be fully flowered. Yeah.
You know, I've asked before, how fast is the present moment? Okay? And what that discussion was about the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you really get into seeing where you are in the present moment, that you can accelerate that change so that the little
Yes.
bitty pieces, instead of spreading out over 10 years, can reduce a whole lot.
That's right, because each one, this is where intention comes in. Intention is about how you'd like things to be in the future. Because the only reason we have intentions is because we have this capacity to project into the future and say, well, I'd rather it be this way in the future rather than that way. And so you do things that are directed to making it be this way rather than that way. And the same thing with yourself. When you begin to understand that who I am in the future is the result of what I do, then you start generating intentions that will mold and shape you. Now, if for only a very brief period of time do I hold those intentions, then they're not going to have nearly as much impact as if I hold those intentions repeatedly in more and more present moments as they unfold. And whether or not I do that is all going to come from how well I understand. If I understand that I have the capacity to make myself a wise and happy being who is free from suffering, if I truly understand that, then I'm going to hold those intentions really consistently, and I'm going to get there very quickly. So I can become a Buddha in as little as 7 days. Or the Buddha, in the Satipatthana Sutra, he said that can only take 7 days. He said, but even if you're sloppy, you should be able to do it in 7 years. That's what he says. It's all about how well you really understand and really believe that you have this power. Because after all, you have a good intention now, but then you have a bad intention a moment from now that cancels it out. It's all for nothing.
Oh.
Okay. So that's the 5 aggregates. It's a rather amazing thing, I always thought. Often underappreciated. Now, I'll just emphasize here something. We're going to look at the 3 characteristics. And one thing that often causes consternation to people, if they really do understand what the Buddha is saying when he says that I am these 5 aggregates and nothing more, and there is no self in this, is nobody brought it up. Somebody made us think, well, what about my soul? And we didn't get there yet. But if you're willing to give up this idea of your separate soul, you're going to get to a place that is far, far better. But if you're attached to your separate soul, you're going to have a lot of trouble with this. And so I'm asking you to at least stay open to the possibility that I may actually be better off not having a soul. Let me at least pursue the thinking to find out whether or not this is true. So, yes.
I think it also depends on your definition of what soul is.
It does, yeah.
And to me, it's not, my definition doesn't so much emphasize the individuality as that which connects me to everything, to the oneness.
Well, in that case, that's a definition that is a very workable definition. And what you find in the religious traditions that firmly posit a soul, like Christianity and Judaism, probably Islam. I don't know Islam that well, but in both Judaism and Christianity, there is, at the more sophisticated levels of understanding, a recognition of how problematic that this separate soul is. And that, as a matter of fact, that kind of definite reality of the separate soul stands in the way of achieving the actual goal of these religions, which is to ultimately achieve a union with God. So what they do is they end up having to redefine the soul so that the soul is actually, it's done in different ways, but often it comes to be the soul is the part of me that was the divine reality right from the beginning, you know. And so in that sense, it stops being a separate thing that belongs to me and it's the subject of all this suffering anyway. This is where we're trying to get to.
I think maybe for me, part of the confusion would be the consciousness aggregate. Whether or not that is, because I tend to think of that as different, like what, you know, David might be conscious of right now is different than what I might be conscious of right now. And how do you account for that? Then I get confused.
That different people are conscious of different things, and you are conscious of different things in different moments. See, that's the nature of consciousness, and that's why in this, we're not really talking about consciousness, we're talking about the aggregate of conscious experiences. What you, as an individual person, are is an aggregate of specific conscious experiences. Consciousness itself, which we don't look at in this, the consciousness itself is only differentiated by its objects. And so consciousness is actually a universal property, but at least in terms of people, everybody in this room is conscious. Everybody in this room is conscious of different things. And the consciousness itself is no part of what differentiates us from each other. It's the objects of consciousness that individualize us.
I mean, I think that's what I think maybe causes the idea of soul. I think is what I was trying to say before.
Well, okay, and it is. People try to do that, but they run into exactly the same problem. They say, okay, my consciousness is my soul. Consciousness is. But then when they try to make that personal, that's when it collapses. Because consciousness isn't personal. I mean, consciousness exists. When you say, I am conscious of something, there's the thing that I'm conscious of, and then there's consciousness. But what individuates the consciousness is the object. There are not multiple consciousnesses. There is only one consciousness. We all share in it.
You said what individuates the consciousness?
What individuates a particular conscious experience is its object. Consciousness itself, there is no separateness in consciousness itself. So there can be no separate soul. There can't be my soul and your soul can't be. That would mean it'd be two different consciousnesses, and there aren't two different consciousnesses. There's that set of consciousnesses of, and this set of consciousnesses of. And what makes that set different from this set is what we're conscious of, not the consciousness itself. Consciousness does not have that property of individuation.
I guess what I'm confused about is how it gets divided into your consciousness of and my consciousness of. Does that make any sense? I guess that's probably a much further question maybe, but.
Like why the
You know, the
consciousness,
object?
Why are
all
they
the
divided
consciousness
into,
ofs don't include each other or something like that. right?
why are they divided into all these different keeps?
Okay, well,
You know,
let's put it another way. Let's say, okay, since they are divided into all these different keeps, I think this is the same question, but turning around another way. We'll ask ourselves, okay, so they're divided into all these separate heaps, but is it possible that that division could disappear? Is that the same question? Turned around? It implies a different answer. It's the same question, but it implies a different answer. The answer being, yes, it is possible. It is not necessary that consciousness be isolated, that you cannot know you cannot share in another being's consciousness of. Okay? Because that, in fact, is one of the things that happens when your self-individuating mind acquires a certain degree of wisdom, it begins to let go of the barriers. And as it lets go of the barriers, consciousness, which is a single, pure, and universal principle, begins to have the kind of access to all the objects of consciousness, which in a sense was its own right the entire time. Put it another way,
Yeah.
the illusion that you can't be conscious of everything is just that, an illusion.
Yeah, I mean, I think I come from that base of idea, but then I start to get confused when what you said, like that it comes from the object, that what determines its individuation is the object. How is that? Or
Well-
does everybody else get that?
Okay. Well, so I know exactly what you're saying. Your mind creates the object, and your mind creates its own separateness. This is what as we go along here, we're going to talk about exactly that the mind projects thingness on something. This is ultimate reality in its totality. Your mind projects the little boundary that separates one part off from another and makes it an object. Your mind creates a thought by isolating it from the whole. It creates a sensation by isolating it from the whole.
But the heaps are individual, I almost said separate. The heaps are kind of.
The heaps are separate, but they're only separate because the mind makes them separate.
Right. Sorry.
Sorry, no. This is good. It's really clear. Ultimate reality involves no separation. All separation is imposed by the mind.
Okay, so in ultimate reality, the heaps aren't separate.
In ultimate reality, the heaps are not separate. But in your perception of yourself as an individual person, your mind is making them separate. And as a matter of fact, in my mind's perception of you as separate, it's my mind that's making you separate. So from all separation exists only within a mind.
If I were to try to explain that to one of my children, they would do lots of things, but believe me, okay? It's like how do you, if you're not here, or if you're not interested, if you're not following a practice, how do you discover that?
How do you discover this?
I mean, lots of people suffer and never discover why they're suffering.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean,
The teacher.
it's like brain rot. You know, we might all be, but one water.
Yes, I'd use an even better example. You can take a body of water and you can make a little cube out of wire, and you drop your little cube in, and where it hangs, okay, I've made that water separate from the rest. There is a cube of water, and I can move it over a little bit, and I have a new cube of water. It contains some of the same water as the last cube, and some different water. Wherever I move my little wire cube around, I have a cube of water, but it's all the same water. It's a distinction that's created by my little wire cube. It's a distinction that's created by your mind.
The nature of the individual person, 5 aggregates. Maybe what you would ask, is there anything missing that we can see? The fact of where we put that wire in the water.
Yeah.
Just that is based on our karma, or how we're perceiving of the objects. How there's that other underlying, which is maybe the base on even just dividing things. It basically, and then furthermore, the individual characteristics of all subdivisions.
Yes, where you put the wire cube in the water, how it moves, and how it can be subdivided. All of this is a result of causes and conditions. It's all inherent in the whole.
So karma and causes and conditions are inherent in each of the 5 aggregates, and so we don't need to list it as another part of the stuff.
That's right. Yeah, karma is one kind of causality.
Okay.
It's one kind of causality, right?
So would we need to put all the different causalities, even though that might be impossible, in order to define the nature of the individual person?
Well, we could define the individual person from the point of view of causality. And there is physical causality, so there's the physics and chemistry. There's the biological causality, there's the DNA and everything that makes an individual person have the certain characteristics they do. There is the psychological causality, which is a person with that particular mind is going to behave in the way that's dictated by the structure of their mind. Each of us is different psychologically, so there's psychological causality. And then there's karmic causality. And karmic causality, that's how we form ourselves. So in this moment, you are the result of physics and chemistry, biology, the laws of psychology that govern the way your mind works, and how you have created yourself through your past actions and intentions. Okay? So all of these different causalities have determined your uniqueness in this moment.
Would it be possibly like if we're going to believe that there are past lives, and if we take that as truth, and then all of the different behaviors that we've exhibited throughout the infinite lives, weren't those actually, could we prove that those had to do with what psychological characteristics we have, what physical characteristics we have in this particular time, or would there be some other?
Okay, interesting question. Now, the thing is that if we go back to dependent arising, we see that what you are in this moment is ultimately the result of absolutely everything that's ever happened. So your past lives, the past lives that have formed you are the past lives of every sentient being that's ever existed. Okay? And that's absolutely true. Where we end up getting on thin ice and making a mess of things is we try to say, well, no, actually what I am is a result of this one particular being that lived in the past. And that's not the case. You're the result of, you are the karmic product of every sentient being that's lived in the past. So, if you want to review your past lives, you have to review every past life, because they're all yours. Yes.
Is the universe infinite and eternal?
What's that?
Is the universe infinite and eternal?
And eternal. Well, depends on what you mean by the universe. But what we can surmise about ultimate reality is that it's infinite and eternal. So, therefore we are too. Although just knowing that doesn't help us much.
Yeah, but there's always there's always that little thing about, well, I'm going to remember that. You know, that's going to be, I'm going to base my future based on my past lives. There's always that little thing that goes in there with that kind of,
Right.
and I've not heard you say yes or no to that.
To the remembering that?
No, yeah, well, yes, but the reincarnation thing that says, which is a common popular belief about,
Popular belief, yes.
yeah, that there is a carryover.
Right. That there is something unique and non-physical that survives the dissolution of the body and persists in another being and is the same unique thing. But as we'll see as we keep going with it, that's not the good thing that people assume that it is. If that were true, it's terrible, but it's not true. let's go back to past lives. Why would anybody want to know what, if reincarnation was true, why would anybody want to know their past lives? And part of it might be, it would make them feel better about things because they say, okay, well, I understand now why this is the way it is. They might learn from it, and they might say, oh, well, seeing how this produces these kind of results, then I'll behave differently. Okay? And what I'm saying is you can get both of those things from understanding all of your past lives, not just selecting one out and say that's the real me and the rest aren't. You don't need to have this linear sequence of separate individuals, which you aren't even in this in this life. You're not even the same person that you've been throughout your entire life. But you somehow imagine there's something about you that is more same than these 5 aggregates. Because you can see these 5 aggregates are just constantly changing. And so you're saying, so if you believe in reincarnation, you want to say, okay, there's something else, and it stays more sane than any of these things do. And it'll carry over into the next life. And you don't need that. It doesn't serve any purpose. The Buddha did say that he saw past lives. He didn't say they were his past lives. He said he viewed huge numbers of past lives. And if he did that, if you did that, if anyone did that, you would learn enormously from it. We do something similar if you read biographies and autobiographies, or for that matter, if you read novels, or if you go to movies. In all of those, they're all opportunities to make sense of things and to learn from them. And that's really all that you would do. If you were reincarnated and you viewed your own series of past lives, that's all you would do is learn from it the same way that you learn from going to movies or reading biographies. And if I say to you that every sentient being that's ever lived in the past is you, then that just gives you more past lives to draw on.
I don't want to let this opportunity slip by. Yeah. We have movie night here every
And there's popcorn.
If you are not yet at the stage of your meditation where you experience past lives regularly, then come to movie nights and there's this thing.
When is it?
We just had the last movie night, what, a couple weeks ago.
Friday nights.
Okay.
It's on Friday night when it fits into Kubasa's schedule.
Some Friday night in May, probably.
Good to know.
And we haven't determined a movie night for May. It's also a pop question, by the way, so there's community building going on at the same time. It usually starts at 6.
We'll do one last quick question, and then what we're going to do, since we've agitated our minds sufficiently, is meditate till lunch. Okay? All right. Okay.
One thing I'm finding logically, not the whole thing of you can affect 10 years from now, more than 2 weeks, more than next moment, virtually impossible, can affect next life. And referring back to this gentleman's question before about then nihilism or, there's no point. My understanding, however immature it is, which, is that with proper intention, motivation, hopefully for larger, more beautiful things for more than just oneself, you are planting those seeds that, to create that. And then, so if we were to say that, there is not something that is, whether it be constantly changing and not the same thing, that is going on some kind of trajectory that can be, that directed. And that, and as opposed to there is no trajectory that one can help point that isn't totally affected by, I perceive some people committing war crimes. Right? So if that war crime is going to equally affect, like, how much, and I understand these terms like up and down and higher and lower, they probably fall away, but I'm just going to use it. Go towards enlightenment, move up the path, move forward. If there isn't some kind of individual thing that does that, then how can a Buddha come up? Then it would feel like everybody together has to become enlightened at the same moment. And maybe when you're Buddha, you realize everyone is enlightened. I don't know. But so, you get what I'm saying? Talking about being able to, therefore, it would mean that, yes, some past lives are maybe more important, or instrumental, or directing, or culminating for all the different causes and conditions. They are more important in terms of a path or progressing on a path.
What we're saying is that you don't have to be a separate self in order for there to be that direction and for there to be those results. And that's really all that we're saying at this point. As we go along, hopefully the rest of it will become clear what the alternative is. But the alternative to you not being the separate self that you think of yourself as is it doesn't remove or deny these other things that you see as being the other good consequences that you attribute to separate selfhood are really not dependent upon separate selfhood. Rather, what depends upon separate selfhood are the conditions of suffering that we don't need. So I'm hoping maybe right after lunch when we talk about the three characteristics and no self, that will become still clearer. But just simply, self is about separation, and separation contributes nothing. So once we remove separation, separateness from the picture, then there's a lot of good things become possible that separateness limits us.
Why does separation exist?
What's that?
If it attributes for nothing, why does it exist?
Well, I'll put it this way. The reason that we have minds, that we're born in a form that we have a mind that creates separation, is because that's how the world works. That's how, we see ourselves as, well, let's move back a notch. Let's say living organisms perceive themselves as separate, and they're compelled by desire and aversion so that they'll get what they need to survive, and they'll get a mate, and they'll produce offspring. And in the case of organisms that care for their offspring, like we do, it'll also ensure the survival of our offspring. So we have evolved minds that see ourselves as separate because it contributes to that process being successful. If you remove this sense of separateness from cats and dogs and horses and pigs, they probably wouldn't survive very well. Humans don't need it. Okay? In itself, separateness, it's a part of ultimate reality because it works. It's a part of the causal process that works. Life would not exist on this planet if one little droplet of the primordial ocean hadn't separated itself from the rest by a membrane and became the first cell. And everything else, what we are, the beings we are today, would no longer need to be driven by the perception of separateness or existence to that initial separateness.
So then through enlightenment and consciousness, we can stop being
We could stop being
the humans that we are.
the
The separate.
That's right. We can stop being the separate humans that we can be a completely new kind of human, a non-separate human. That's what the Buddha was. And that's what all the Buddhas since him have been. Okay? And that's what we want to become. This new kind of not separate human. Because we look at the world and we see what a mess separate, greedy, hateful humans have made us things.
Kind of break from our evolved.
Material and biological evolution has taken us as far as it can. And so it's up to us to carry forward in the next step of spiritual evolution. If we fail in that, well, material and biological evolution will take over again, and we'll be replaced by someone else who hopefully can do a better job than us. As I think that the ultimate destiny of the world is that everybody becomes completely enlightened.
Some people try to escape it by committing suicide. But
And if you were a separate self, then committing suicide might be a way of escaping.
you get the opportunity of
But you lose the opportunity of enlightenment. Yeah, you lose because suicide is based on believing that you are a separate self, trying to destroy that separate self. And as a matter of fact, that was the spiritual goal of most religious teachers in the time of the Buddha, was to find a way to annihilate the separate self.